Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today we're diving into a therapy that's super popular, but is suddenly making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Dry needling. Yeah, after a pretty shocking injury to a major athlete, a lot of people are asking some tough questions, and we are going to break it all down.
So let's just rip the Band-Aid off and get right to the big question. Can a therapy that's supposed to help your muscles actually cause a collapsed lung? The short answer, well, yeah, it can. But the full story has so much more to it than that, so let's get into it.
The whole reason we're even talking about this is because of what happened to Pittsburgh Steelers linebacker TJ Watt. Reports came out that he suffered something called a pneumothorax, basically a partially collapsed lung, and that it was tied to a dry needling treatment he just had. Now, when an injury like that happens to a superstar athlete, it totally raises the stakes and makes us all wonder, wait a minute, how safe is this stuff really?
To really understand the whole picture, we've got to start with the injury itself. The TJ Watt story is kind of our way in, because it shines a bright light on the most serious, though I gotta say, very rare risk involved.
So what exactly is a pneumothorax? It sounds super intense, right? But the idea is actually pretty simple. Think of it like this. Your lung sits inside your chest, but there's this tiny, thin space between the lung itself and your chest wall. If air gets into that space, it creates pressure that literally pushes on the lung, causing it to deflate, kind of like a leaky balloon. When you're talking about needling, this could happen if a needle goes just a little too deep in an area right near the lungs, like your upper back or your shoulders.
So to really get a handle on the risks and, the benefits, we need to be crystal clear on what this treatment actually is. What is dry needling? And just as important, what is it not?
Okay, so at its heart, dry needling is a modern technique. It's based in Western medicine and what we know about the human body. A practitioner takes a really thin, solid needle. That's why it's called dry, by the way, because nothing is injected, and they insert it right into these tight bands of muscle. The whole goal is to fix specific problems in the muscle tissue, to get you out of pain and moving better.
The specific things they're aiming for are called myofascial trigger points. That's the fancy term, but you and I know them as knots. You know that feeling, those super tender, almost ropey spots in your muscles that can be a source of all kinds of pain and stiffness. The theory is that putting a needle right into these knots makes them release, which then, hopefully, cuts down the pain and lets the muscle work like it's supposed to.
Now, this is probably the biggest point of confusion out there, so let's clear it up right now. They both use thin needles, but dry needling and acupuncture are totally different things. It's awesome how this slide breaks it down. Dry needling is all about Western anatomy. It's targeting those physical knots in your muscles. Acupuncture, on the other hand, comes from traditional Chinese medicine, and it's all about targeting points along what they call meridians to balance your body's energy, or qi. So you've got different philosophies, different targets, and totally different goals. And this leads us to a really critical point, the training. A licensed acupuncturist goes through thousands of hours of school. We're talking graduate-level education on how to use needles safely. Now contrast that with other pros who offer dry needling, like physical therapists. They often take much shorter certification courses, sometimes as little as a weekend. Look, this isn't a knock on their skills, but it is a huge difference to keep in mind when we're talking about safety.
Okay, so we've covered the basics. Now let's get real and talk about what most people actually feel after a dry needling session. Let's forget the scary headlines for a second. What are the normal, totally expected side effects?
So if you look at the data from patients themselves, soreness is by far the #1 thing people report. We're talking over half the time. After that comes some temporary pain right where the needle was and some minor bruising or bleeding. These are all what we call localized effects, meaning they happen right there at the treatment spot.
The main thing to get here is that these common side effects are actually seen as normal parts of the healing process. That soreness, it feels a lot like you just had a really good workout. Any bruising is usually pretty minor. Some people even say they feel tired or get a bit of a headache, which are just signs that your body is responding to the treatment and kicking into healing mode. All this stuff is temporary and really isn't a cause for alarm.
So, keeping those common reactions in mind, let's circle back to the scary stuff, the collapsed lung and other big problems. It's time to put the actual risk into perspective and separate those really rare complications from what happens day to day with this treatment.
Let's just start with this powerful number right here. In a huge study that looked at over 20,000 dry needling sessions, the rate of any serious problems was less than 0.1%. To put that another way, that's like one major issue for every 1,000 treatments. So yeah, while serious stuff can happen, the data's pretty clear that it is very, very rare.
And this is great because it shows how different studies basically found the same thing.
Over on the left, a study in Ireland tracked more than 7,600 treatments and found 0 major problems. 0. On the right, that big US study we just talked about, over 20,000 treatments and only 20 major events. Again, less than 0.1%. What's interesting is that the US study was anonymous, which might be why they caught a few more incidents. People probably felt more comfortable reporting them. But the bottom line is the same. Minor side effects are pretty common, but major ones are not.
And this right here is the key point. When serious complications do happen, the research shows it's usually not because the therapy itself is just dangerous. It almost always comes back to the practitioner's training, how well they know their anatomy or their technique. And that really changes the question from, should I get dry needling, to who should I trust to do it?
Okay, so let's bring this all home. We've looked at what it is, how it works, the common side effects, and the really rare risks. So what's the final verdict? Is this something you should actually consider?
You know, after you weigh all the evidence, the big picture is that most people who try dry needling feel that the benefits are totally worth the temporary side effects. Study after study shows that a huge majority of patients say their pain and movement got better after treatment. So, even though soreness is common, the relief that comes after seems to be the real prize for a lot of people.
And if you need one single number to drive that point home, this is it. In one survey that asked patients directly, a whopping 82.1% said they would recommend dry needling to a family member or a friend. I mean, think about that for a second. Even after dealing with some soreness or bruising, more than 8 out of every 10 people found it so helpful that they would tell someone they loved to go do it. That says a lot.
So if you're thinking you might want to try this, how do you make sure you're in good hands? It's easy. Here's a quick safety checklist. Number 1, verify their credentials. Make sure they're licensed and have specific training in dry needling. 2, ask questions. Don't be shy. Ask about their training and experience. 3, make sure they talk to you about the risks and have you sign an informed consent form. That's a must. And finally, number 4, communicate while you're on the table. If anything feels weird or off, you need to speak up. Your safety is always number 1.
So we've looked at the scary headlines, the science, the risks, and the rewards. The evidence seems pretty clear that while serious problems can happen, they're extremely rare, and that the biggest factor in staying safe is the skill of the person holding the needle. So now that you've seen the data, what do you think? Is this a risk you'd be willing to take for some pain relief? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments.
And that's our deep dive on dry needling. If this explainer helped you get a clearer picture of what's going on, do me a favor and hit that like button. Share it with a friend who might be curious, and definitely subscribe to my channel so you don't miss our next breakdown. Thanks so much for watching.